United States history. This panel is on primary sources. My name is Rockenbach. I am the director of the Humanities and History Libraries here at Columbia. So primary sources are near and dear to my heart. And I think our keynote address really got us all thinking about how primary sources are so key to the practice of history. And I think we're going to talk about the diverse ways in this panel about the use of primary sources. So I'm going to briefly introduce everyone. There are full bios on the website, and I think even in the packet, so you can definitely learn more about each of our participants. I'm going to introduce them in the order they're going to speak, and then we are going to keep their comments to about 10 minutes. Our goal is to have ample time for a discussion. So to start off with, our first speaker will be Ansley Erickson, who's the Assistant Professor of History and Education. She's a historian who focuses on educational inequality and the intersections between schooling, urban and metropolitan space, and the economy. Today, Ansley will focus on her Educating Harlem project at Teachers College, which engages graduate students, high school students, and community members in inquiry about the history of education in Harlem. Our second speaker will be Julie Golia, the Director of Public History at the Brooklyn Historical Society. Julia received her PhD from Columbia University and has helped produce documentaries, including a 2003 Peabody Award-winning film, Tupperware. We'll hear a little bit about that today. Today she will talk about the primary sources she found and didn't find when curating an exhibition about the Civil War in Brooklyn. Our third speaker will be Mary Freeman, who is a doctoral candidate in the history department here at Columbia, studying 19th century U.S. history. Mary has been working on a History in Action project to digitize resources in the collections related to slavery in the Rare Book Manuscript Library here at Columbia, with the end goal of making these collections more accessible to members of the public, both online and in person. Our final speaker will be Kathleen Franz, Curator from the Division of Work and Industry at the National Museum of American History. For the last 10 years, Kathleen has held the position of Associate Professor of History and American Studies and Director of Public History at American University. At American University, she has built a graduate program in public history and that has trained over 100 students. She will discuss the role of primary sources in a new exhibition on business history at the National Museum of American History titled American Enterprise. So with that, we'll get started.
It's a pleasure to be here and to get to talk about this work, which is somewhat different maybe than some of the other pieces on the panel, because I'm going to talk about the process maybe more than sort of really finished product. And some of our museum colleagues and historians type to make very beautiful finished things. So we're in this moment of incredibly fast and broad digitization of primary source material. The numbers are pretty staggering, right? The New York Public Library just released 180,000 images for full high-res download. There are more than 11 million items in the Digital Public Library of America. And so that sense of access to primary sources is pretty remarkable and wonderful. But there's this question about how we go from having all this stuff out there to leveraging them to give history a bigger place in public life. And I'm interested not so much in the public life that's represented by fabulous work at the level of the New Yorker, for example, but public life of people who live in communities close to campus and who use history to make sense of the lives that they live. So I think to consider this, then the point I want to make is that thinking about primary sources involves thinking about how they connect to different communities in different ways. That's an obvious point, I think, but still one worth exploring. So I work across the street, across 120th Street at Teachers College, which is a professional school of education. And I work with a colleague on a project that we call Educating Harlem, which is interested in studying the history of education in Harlem around three parallel tracks. One is scholarly research, one is graduate classes for students in history and other teacher education fields, and one is high school students in an outdoor school space. I want to make clear that the work I'm describing here is dependent on the good labors of many people beyond myself. One of them is Barbara Rockenbach, another is Ty Jones, and also the Columbia Center for Digital Research and Scholarship. So what I'd like to describe is the ways in which a collection of primary source materials panelists have been valuable in the classes I teach, have been valuable in an after-school program that we run with high school students in a Central Harlem high school, and that connect also to communities beyond that. So when I teach the classes that I teach, which are on the history of American education, I have a set of goals that relate to their position as future teachers. Some of them want to be historians, but most of them want to be future teachers. And sources like this one, and that come from sources like this, get at a particular set of goals for that community. In this case, we are focusing on, sorry, I skipped ahead a slide. Let me clarify something. The class, the high school project, and a lot of our work this year focuses very intensively on one location, one building, Wadley High School, which is on the corner of 114th and Adams Lane Powell, that's like less than a half a mile from here, and in some ways is a perfect microcosm of the history of 20th century Harlem. It's opened as an elite, almost all-white girls' school in 1901. It changes status and demographics many times over the course of the history, and to bring us to the present, it's now subdivided between public school, a small public high school, and a charter school. So in some ways, it's the whole story all in one place. There's a rich collection of materials at that school that are available to us in part because people at the school itself are interested in having their story documented and analyzed and thought about and shared. And one of the core of these materials for us right now are a collection of yearbooks from the time when the school was a junior high school, co-ed junior high school operating from 57 through the 80s. The yearbooks look like this. And they include images that are very useful in my classes with future teachers, thinking in Chimamanda Adichie's terms about making sure that future teachers have more than one story about urban education and the children who go to school and the communities they represent in Central Harlem. They're also useful for thinking about the ways in which, in the mid-1960s, students perceived and described their own neighborhood, the school that they attended, and they proved very useful for thinking about how they digested and made sense of the world around them. This is, we don't have time to read it, but it's this incredible juxtaposition between thinking about segregation in the 1960s and the traditional nursery rhyme. Students in the class work with these materials in a variety of different ways. One of the things that we do is create a space for them to make digital projects about the work that they're finding in the yearbook. So this is a student-designed digital exhibit around the theme of ways that in the mid-1960s young people are imagining their futures and the ways that the yearbooks provide a source for understanding those conceptualizations of the future. It's wonderfully interactive, and I'm not going to take the time to show you that right now, unfortunately. So in that context, these primary sources provide the hub for a rich, typical university conversation. But some of the very same questions that motivate students in that class then also apply in the work that we do with young people in this after-school program. And the young people who are in this after-school program are students in the Wadley building. They attend a school that has a different name, but they're in the same space. And so in addition to their being curious about how their historical peers experience their neighborhood, how they experience their school, there's also another way in which the yearbooks prove really valuable in connecting them to history, which is around their ability to see major events in the world, major events that show up in their curriculum, but in a very local focus. So, for example, Wadley existed during World War II, and Wadley's yearbook, this is the cover, 1943, became a place for students talking about the war. And they also talk about the war in ways that are very familiar to historians of the United States African American history and civil rights movement. The double V is well illustrated in conversations about what it means to be a, quote, colored soldier in the era, during World War II. So high school students in this context see in these sources, I think, a valuable connection not just to their own curiosity about people like them earlier in history, but ways to see linkages between their own neighborhood and the seemingly more distant history that they might encounter in their regular classes. So this is to say that these materials have sort of become the hub of two kinds of communities that we've been interested in developing. One is future teachers and historians, and the other is young people who we label them youth historians. But thirdly, and I think this is crucial for historians, especially those of us with the benefit of working with living subjects, crucial to remember is that there in some ways is already a community around these documents. The reason we have access to them is because people cared enough about them to gather them together at the school's library. And the school's librarian is interested enough in them to say to me, would you please bring in a camera over the summer and take pictures of these? Can you use them in your school? We'll give you access to them. And even more so, when I talk to individuals about these documents, including one woman who's the bottom right person right there, you know, she connects these materials to her own story. And so when we do an oral history with her later, which we'll do, part of what we'll talk about is what this record of her schooling means. But secondly, the big organized network of individuals who are still connected to this school as alumni think of these as important records of their own. And actually, one of the women who found out that we were interested in digitizing these, and I wanted to make sure she liked the idea of having them online, said, oh, that's great, because every other week I get a phone call from somebody who says, I need to get a copy of the 1965 yearbook, and I want to figure out how not to have to take them to a printer and have them unbound and have them reproduced. You know, and so there's a sense of a live set of networks around these materials that we should be paying attention to. So in this way, primary sources play a role in all of these, what I think are important conversations about history and community life. But I also want to suggest that this is not just about outreach. Sorry, pushed the wrong button. It's fundamentally, I think, about scholarship. So I do not lead the Youth Historians program on a daily basis. I'm fortunate to have a graduate student who does so as part of his assistantship. But every time I visit, I'm reminded of how much I learn from the ways that people who aren't me and who have a different relationship to these material approach these materials. And so this image, for example, which I showed a group of students last week, the first thing I noticed was, I don't know if any of you have a picture of this block in your mind, but the thing that stands out the most in comparison to the present day is right now that block is heavily treed, and it's so treed actually as one of the darker sort of side streets in this section of Harlem. And so I pointed that out, and we talked about that for a little while. We talked about how it made the street feel different. And then these youngsters who go to this building every day paid attention to something that I would otherwise have missed, which is that there are all of these people loitering. People, meaning they're students. They're hanging out at school, as the kids put it. They're hanging out after school, which to me seemed utterly unremarkable. And to them, it was incredibly important because they said, we don't get to do that right now. We have to leave. The security guards shoo them very quickly away from the door of their school, and it's not a space that they can occupy. And so, to this idea of the purposes for thinking about the past, I think there's a kind for them, this image of their school as a place that kids used to get to be comfortable around, and in their neighborhood and on their street, does something towards this idea of history as disrupting and taken for grantedness of the present. Right? The questions that it raises are critical ones. Right? Why can't they be there? Whose decisions are they that they can't be there? But it's, for me, one example of how there's the potential for a really rich engagement between these kinds of materials and this community of students. So, thanks. I look forward to your thoughts and questions.
Golia. I'm the Director of Public History at Brooklyn Historical Society. We could talk for 10 minutes about what that means, but for the purposes of this talk, means I'm one of the main curators of history exhibitions that we put on at that institution, which is in Brooklyn Heights. I was actually the person who asked the question about how you consolidate the long, languid archival process into smaller public history projects available for the audiences on a much sort of faster basis. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my struggles with that, actually, in curation, some ideas I have about that, and then also about silences of the archives. So in 2013, I was tasked with doing a Civil War exhibition, as I bet a lot of curators across the country were. If anyone's been to our institution, it's a rather small institution, and our gallery spaces are intimate, and I think that was a real inspiration. Wanting this is not to be this sort of grand narrative of the Civil War that you see in so many places, but to be about people and to feel really intimate. And all the history that we do at EHS has to really dialogue with the present and be relevant for broad audiences. And so I started thinking about this from the perspective of soldiers today, and the way that the soldiers communicate today, and the way that the technology and the mediums with which they communicate are quite different than the ones that we interact with in the archives. Spoke to a lot of soldiers and veterans, and they talked a lot about how different it was, particularly older ones, to switch from a world in which they wrote letters to a world in which they communicated electronically. How important it was to be able to see people's faces, but what was lost in the sort of the slowness and the intimacy of letter writing. And those questions became the sort of the inspiration for the exhibition that came out of this, which focused on two aspects of what you just saw in the past slide. The written word on page, and so the amazing thousands of letters that we hold in VHS's archives, and then also this moment of technological innovation in the history of photography, when carte de visite are invented, and you now have this sort of this democratizing moment in the capturing a loved one's face just in time for 30,000 Brooklynites to march off to the Civil War. So we wanted to look at the way that people remembered each other both in text and in face. And this is where I did a lot of the prep work for this exhibition. This is our archives. It's lovely. I encourage you all to come research there or do work there. We have great collections. And I got to dive in with a group of research assistants to about 1,200 letters written by Brooklyn soldiers back to their families and vice versa, though for, I think, obvious logistical reasons, we have more soldiers' letters than we do loved ones' letters, because those were sent home rather than being carried in your pocket off to battle. And this was a long process. We coded everything, we put it into a database, and the entire process of looking at these letters took about 5 months. And I really grappled with two major questions here, which is that the experience of getting to know someone through their letters is a slow process, and it's an iterative process, and you see their lives unfold and their personalities unfold over time. That requires time, and it's a non-linear experience, and how do we capture that in an exhibition for a broad group of people, from kindergartners up through very passionate and educated about the Civil War, which is another kind of challenge. And then also grappling with the holes in VHS's archives. Archives have their own politics and their own silences, which are often difficult to bring to life. And so those two things are what I'm going to get into today. So one thing I really wanted to make sure that we could bring to life for people is the intimacy of reading someone's letters. There is something very one-on-one about reading, particularly a romantic letter between two people. You capture the way that they talk to each other, you capture the nuances of their sometimes complicated relationships. If you're able and you have the luxury of reading letters over time, you get to see their relationship build or disintegrate. And sometimes you actually learn about the fate of people as it's going along. So here's one example, the Kelsey family. We started reading the letters between 3 Kelseys. Samuel was a soldier that went off to fight. At this point, this Brooklyn family was living in Pennsylvania. Samuel had a brother, Rufus. He didn't fight. He didn't go out to war. That was complicated. And there was a lot of resentment there. And they were also writing with their father, Daniel. And we see, I think unsurprisingly, those of us that are familiar with the Civil War, the sort of the slow disillusionment of Samuel over time, describing battle after battle, his frustration that his brother was not at war with him, and it never became clear to us through our research why Rufus didn't actually enlist or wasn't drafted. And then the letters drop off in 1863, and we didn't know what happened to him. Our records indicated that Samuel may have deserted in late 1863. And then we found this letter from Dad Daniel to Brother Rufus, in which he, on page 3 of this letter, tells us, "I have never experienced so grieving a loss as I had of Samuel. Oops, sorry. It is as if I did not know what to do or how to control my feelings. It seems to be so different from all my expectations. I had hardly thought he would die before me. I never had anything to take such a hold of me, and I hardly know what to do with myself." So this is how we found out that Samuel died. And it was a pretty traumatic moment as a researcher, which I think a lot of us have had, especially when researching in private papers. How to bring that experience to life for a museum goer was a major challenge for us. And I think our answer really was to write the research process into the panels and the labels and the entire exhibition itself. Another challenge we faced is this idea of a letter as an artifact versus a letter as a text. These are the same thing. And I think you guys can tell that reading them on the primary source is quite different than reading a transcript of that. In some cases, we had amazing letters that were torn and had pencil marks all over them and were impossible to read that we could not feature in the exhibition, even though the content itself was great. We have to think about that. If somebody sees a letter that they cannot read, they are not going to want to engage with that letter. And so part of the process of creating this is thinking about the visual. We also had a lot of transcripts, including this very sexy letter from Washington Roebling, who we all know as one of the major engineers of the Brooklyn Bridge, to his then fiance. And you have never witnessed as hot and heavy a courtship as you have if you read the letters before these two get married. I mean, they fell hard. And I think this letter, in which he dreams of her sitting on his lap and telling him how naughty she has been during the day and sealing each sweet avowal with an elliptical kiss. It's sort of electric off the page, except we didn't have the page. We just had a transcript of it. In other cases, letter writers were dull, but they were talented in other ways. And there is another series of courtship letters between a man named Alfred Cranston and the woman who eventually becomes his wife, Lizzie, in which the words were dry, but the amazing and evocative drawings that he sent to her, including this one depicting the building of the Capitol Dome in 1861, were told other stories. Eventually, we came up with a bunch of ways to bring these letters to life, in labels, in panels, in wall vinyls. But one thing I just want to emphasize here, and it's a tension that I don't think has an answer, is the more that we curate these letters, the more that we pick out the right stories for people, the more we separate them from the process of archival research, because reading letters is long, and a lot of it is frustrating, and it's non-linear, and as we saw with Samuel Kelsey, the meat was buried on page 3. Good thing we kept reading that letter, because our answers lay there. And so that's a very challenging thing, I would say, to bring to a museum public. The other challenge is who wasn't represented in our archives. So BHS was founded in 1863. Like a lot of historical societies at the time, it was a club with rather high membership dues. It was an elite club. There were no people of color there, and who were part of that membership, although a lot of women actually. But I think more importantly, reflective of library collecting at the time, this was a time when people were not collecting the materials of social history. The letters of African Americans were not valued by the people who founded BHS. I mean, happily, we take the opposite view today. We take a very sort of social history ground-up approach to the work and the collecting that we do now, but we're left with the legacy of our founders, right? And so when I went into this, I was pretty positive I wouldn't find working class voices, and I was pretty positive I wouldn't find African American voices. I was right on the African American voices question. So not only did I find that BHS did not hold one letter of an African American soldier from Brooklyn in its entire archives, I was unable to find one in all of New York City, which is, I think, a pretty powerful thing. Went to all the archives, and I actually found some leads in which they were described as African American letters, like one at New York Historical Society, when it turned out to be the white officer of a USCT regiment. So I ended up finding a lead in a 1940 article in the Journal of Negro History of a series of letters held at Duke University Special Collections, including those of a man named Edgar Dinsmore, who who was not a Brooklynite, but he was writing to a Brooklynite, so I fudged it. He was from Connecticut, and he actually wrote into the Anglo-African newspaper asking for a pen pal. And he found a woman who lived on Carroll Street in Brooklyn named Carrie Drayton, and they began a really wonderful and powerful correspondence. He was incredibly reflective about his civic duty to fight and his optimistic hopes for what being a soldier would bring to his race. When rebellion is crushed, who will be more proud than I to say I was one of the first of the despised race to leave the free North with a rifle on my shoulder and give the lie to the old story that the black man will not fight. And now that he will fight, no one here will dare deny. Really powerful, and I think he had a very keen sense of the power of his own writing as well. But we had to go all the way to North Carolina to find a letter from a Connecticut man to feature in the Brooklyn Historical Society to bring this experience to life. And, you know, the work of Bell Wiley, who studied 20,000 letters in his study of Billy Yang, he found, I think he said he found about a dozen letters from African-American soldiers to their families. And so how to bring that whole to life? And the answer was that we really just wrote that into the exhibition as well, and led by asking visitors to the exhibition to consider whose voices we had and whose voices we didn't. And I think this is a really important thing to do, is to take on the politics of your own institution and not shy away from them, but actually call attention to them and to show how your institution has changed. The same incidentally went for African American faces. We featured 136 carte de visite in a really beautiful installation that I hope you'll all get on the train and come see. And we actually have one carte de visite in the entire archives of an African American face, and it's this young man. We don't know who he is. We can only kind of guess that he might have been an apprentice based on his apron. I was wrong on the working class question. We did have working class letters, and we located a collection from the Friel family. And in an interesting way, the Friels were like the most honest and the most informal and affectionate in their writings back and forth to their families. And you see a lot of their sort of family dynamics and foibles. But what you also see is the very common racism articulated by Union soldiers at the time. And I'm going to play you a clip right now that is a little explicit in language. This is a reading of one of the letters that we featured in the exhibition.
Lieutenant, South Carolina, February the 15th, 1863. Dear Father and Mother, I write you these few lines so that they will find you in joy and good health. Dear Father, I see by your letter that you think the war will be over pretty soon. I hope so. By God, I often think so myself. If I had thought that I was coming out to fight for the nigger, I'd be the last one to come out. Plenty more besides me. The people cannot see it anymore, getting their sons and brothers killed for nothing but the niggers.
So it was really important for us to not only include this letter, but to actually give voice to this letter. And it was actually a very big debate by our staff on how we were going to bring this letter to life. Because the opposite side of showing that silence of the archives was also to show why there was that silence of the archives, to demonstrate that power relation, how ubiquitous it was throughout 19th century society, and, you know, in some ways seeing some legacies of it as well today. I think it was important for us to be really honest about giving voice to our soldiers, and to do that, we actually employed 3 actors who were veterans. And so the man that you heard was an Iraq veteran who had come back about 4 years ago. And in a way, nobody could understand the complexity of the battle scenes that were depicted the way that these guys could. And so then that brings us back to our original point of the 21st century experience through the lens of 19th century people. So I hope that you'll all come to VHS and see the exhibition. It's up through June, and looking forward to talking more.
I'm Mary Freeman, and I'm a PhD candidate in the history department, and I'm also the recipient of one of the History in Action Project Awards. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project that I'm working on for that, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about more generally the experience of being a graduate student, doing some curatorial work, working with primary sources, and kind of the skills that I've gained from that over the time I've been doing it. So the project I've been working on is making the slavery materials in the Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Columbia accessible to the public, both as an online website, but also hopefully in the long run in person as well. And this sort of stems from the larger goal of making materials at the RBML more accessible, more broadly, not just for slavery materials, but perhaps in the long run other collections as well. Broadening the teaching mission of the RBML to include teachers and students in secondary schools in New York City, as well as potentially a larger audience online. So that's kind of the big goal that got me started on this project. The challenge for me has been to achieve not just accessibility of these sources, but also to encourage active historical engagement with the sources. This goal requires the skills of curation and historical research to portray information in a way that is accessible to students and teachers. Rather than just sort of dumping a bunch of images into a website, I want to have historical content that goes along with them, so that people have sort of a limb to grasp onto when they start looking for more historical knowledge. I also don't want to create more work for teachers who are already very much overworked, and I want to meet their needs through the Common Core standards, which prioritize primary source education, but they don't always give the teachers the necessary tools they need to meet the standards. The big question is how to move beyond just exposing students to these primary sources to genuine engagement with the materials, teaching the historical skills of closely looking, critically thinking, and doing real historical research projects. In the end, students don't just absorb historical knowledge through exposure to primary sources, but the sources need to be curated and presented alongside questions and lesson plans that push them to actively engage with the materials. There are many positives to mass digitization of sources, including the ability for these materials to reach a much broader audience than if they were just locked up in libraries and archives. But on the other hand, it's really easy for students to be overwhelmed by the amount of material that's online. And my big question that I don't know if I've completely successfully answered is how to emulate the experience that we as historians have all the time of closely examining documents in an archives, but in an online format that can be accessible to everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the execution of this project. I started by scanning the materials at the RBML relating to the topic of slavery and putting them into an Omeka website, which I'll show you a little bit in a minute. One of the big challenges is to avoid just dumping images into a database and curating them into a digital exhibit that provides necessary context and background information, while also leaving room for viewers to engage with the material on their own and ask their own questions. The Omeka platform is great for this because it allows the creator of the website to make their own database of items, but also use those items to curate exhibits that prompt those questions. So users can not only see the exhibit and sort of see the questions you've laid out for them, but if they have further questions, there's a pool of material there for them to kind of go beyond and pursue their own research. This is also an exciting project because a lot of the primary sources that are currently available online are published and printed materials rather than handwritten archival documents. So this is a great repository of documents that are not available really in any other format. They're only available at this particular library. So then the long-term goals of this project will be to bring local teachers actually physically into the Rare Books Library for workshops with the materials, and also building towards a sustained connection to these teachers and schools that can bring their students in and sort of do lesson plans that relate to topics that fit the learning needs of their students. While digital accessibility is really important, we do also want to give students the chance to interact with documents in person, and we want to hear from teachers about what they want and need to see from us and how the RBML can improve the teaching mission that currently really only serves Columbia students, graduate students, and undergraduates. So next I want to speak a little bit to my experience as a graduate student working as a curator of these materials for the project. The balance of research and teaching, which is key to working as a historian, is also really important to these curation projects. On one hand, a major goal of my project is to provide historical context, which requires me to do primary research in materials as well as secondary research in relevant historiography. But on the other hand, I don't want to do too much of that research for people who are going to be looking at the exhibit. I want to leave room for the audience to interrogate the sources on their own and formulate their own research questions. Another great aspect of this project has been that it's helped me to develop my digital and technical skills as a historian, which are increasingly important. For example, the idea of metadata is something that most historians might be familiar with as a way of describing and citing their sources that they use in their research, but it's not something that most people set out to do in a very strategic, organized way when they take on a research project. As I scanned the documents for this project, I learned how to create metadata spreadsheets for the sources that enabled me to upload images efficiently to my website. You can see my spreadsheet here. And I know it's sort of silly to show an image of a spreadsheet, but it really revolutionized the way I thought about organizing data not only for this project, but perhaps in future projects related to my dissertation work. And it's just incredible because after you have this spreadsheet, you basically just have an instantaneous database that you can put online with images of your sources. So after you have that kind of baseline step, you can use the sources you have to craft narratives, open up lines of questioning, and build something new from them. In some ways, this curation process is similar to the way historians craft written arguments in articles and dissertations using primary source evidence they've gathered from archives, but it also allows for new ways to visualize information, and it's a more flexible and collaborative format. For example, in this case here, you can use tags that can allow you to sort your various images and items based on different criteria, such as date, location, or type of document. And then you can use this information to visualize data in new ways, such as creating a map or a timeline later on. So this is my metadata spreadsheet. I'm also going to show you this is how I organized my images into collections that corresponded to archival collections. And then when you get down to the item level, you have all this information just directly uploaded from the spreadsheet onto the website. So now I'm working as a teaching assistant for an undergraduate research seminar that explores the connections between Columbia and slavery, which is taught by Ty Jones at the RBML. And having learned about creating a digital exhibit from this project, now we can have our students work on digital projects of their own using the same technology. And they too will learn about how important it is to keep track of the archival sources you use and enter data into a spreadsheet similar to what I did, so that in the end they too will have an online repository of the sources they used for their research projects. So I want to conclude my presentation by talking a little bit about why I chose slavery as the topic for my project. We're in New York, we're in the North, we're not in the South. It's not necessarily the most intuitive subject to choose for the first exhibit of this type. So here on the board I have the intellectual structure of how I'm organizing my exhibit about slavery. And so the reason I chose this topic is that the history of slavery in the United States is something that most high school students will encounter as part of their history curriculum. But it's also very difficult to teach the history of slavery using primary sources when most archival materials were created by elite individuals In other words, the voices that are represented in the sources that I'm working with are more often the voices of slave owners rather than slaves themselves. So this project presents an opportunity to showcase some of the unique sources at the RBML, while also pushing the audience to read between the lines of these sources and to consider what sorts of people and experience are absent from the historical record. Like Julia was talking about in her presentation, the focus on the history of slavery in this exhibit emphasizes silences in the archives and challenges the audience to engage with those omissions rather than taking documents at face value. And this is also where it's really important for the curator and historian to be able to provide the context and kind of the directed questions for people to answer. So while the website does include a digital archive of about 200 items so far, which is about 500 scanned images, the exhibit portion of the website, which I have the outline for up here, is meant to tell a basic chronological history of slavery in the United States, offering further avenues for research while also considering the audience to focus closely on individual sources. The exhibit will ask viewers to answer specific targeted questions that require close examination of individual sources and also encourage them to draw connections to broader historical themes and possibly to pursue further research on their own. So as you can see on the slide, the themes that I've chosen are drawn from the most recent historical scholarship on the history of slavery in the Atlantic world and in the United States, almost like an orals list. But as Jill Poor was saying earlier, it's because you're doing work for the public, that doesn't mean that you need to lower your historical standards. So I'm encouraging people to really think about some of the same questions that historians are thinking about, but using original primary sources to focus their attention on these questions. And then I also want to talk for a minute about the challenges of working with these documents, the silences in these documents. Another challenge, besides the fact that all of these documents are created by slaveholders or by elite members of society rather than the enslaved people themselves, is that a lot of the documents are kind of very similar, and they're all bills of sale, inventories of estates, other kinds of legal documents. So I just wanted to show you a couple of the documents I've been working with and also kind of open up some of the questions that these documents prompt. So first I'm just going to show you the slides. So here, this is basically just a list of slaves. At the top it says, a list of Negro slaves, male and female, of 16 years old and upwards, within the town of Plymouth, Massachusetts, taken in obedience to the general court orders. This is basically just a list of the numbers, the sex, and the ages of slaves in the town of Plymouth, Massachusetts. It also lists the name of the owner, although notably not the name of the slaves themselves. And this is from 1754. Next, this is a runaway advertisement for a runaway slave named Obed from Salem, Massachusetts. And in this ad, it describes his age, his general physical characteristics, and it also mentions that he carried away a significant quantity of clothing when he ran away, and describes some of his clothing, which included a red coat with brass buttons, a green jacket, and breeches with white buttons. So he's quite well dressed. This document here is a manumission document of a slave who belonged to John Dehaney in New York City. It's actually signed by the mayor of New York City, Jacob Radcliffe, and Richard Riker, the recorder. And this document dates to 1817, which was right around the time that the state of New York was slowly marching towards a policy of emancipation. So this is a document that emancipates or manumits the slave, but it's coming at sort of a time of transition in New York City when slavery still does exist. And it's also interesting because Riker, who signed it, was a member of what was known as the Kidnapping Club in New York City, and which basically kidnapped people who were free people of color and sold them into slavery or back into slavery if they had escaped. So it's an interesting document for many reasons. And then this is the final document I have, which is actually a very typical document. It's a bill of sale of a slave named Libby, who was a cook, to a man named James Chestnut in Charleston, South Carolina. And basically the point of showing all of these documents is to reiterate my point, first of all, that they were mostly produced by owners of slaves, and they readily demonstrate how individuals were bought and sold as property. The slaves in these documents are sometimes identified by their names, but more importantly by their sex, their age, their physical characteristics, and their ability to perform labor. So that's sort of the first point that you can really see from all these documents. But what I'm trying to do in this project is to move beyond sort of that first layer of analysis to look at how these documents can open up questions about other historical themes, including gender, resistance, labor, and the law, as well as to demonstrate that slavery does have a history, that it was not the same in every time and place, and that it changed over time. So while it's impossible for us to look at these documents and gain insight into the thoughts and experiences of individual enslaved people, this project acknowledges how silences in the historical record can still be productive by pushing the audience to look closely and examine the existing sources we have. So, thank you.
I'm going to give this 30 seconds, and if it doesn't work, then I'll just talk. But let's see. All right, so I think my 30 seconds are up. I'll just talk. Yeah. I will just talk. So I recently upgraded to a new computer, and it has a different software on it, not PowerPoint, and so that was the problem here. But since we are probably short on time anyway, okay, let me just go ahead and talk and try not to trip over the wires. So I'm Kathleen Franz. Like Jill Lepore, I was always fascinated about leaving the island of academia for another job, which I did recently. I took a job as a full-time curator at the Smithsonian, a new endowed line for them in business history. And so since I can't show you my slides of a big exhibition and how we use primary sources, one of the things that Barbara and I talked about before this was the role of the curator in collecting. So where do the sources
where do those sources that you find in the archives, that you find in the museum collections, where do they come from and who goes out and gets them? So our collections at the National Museum of American History we have 3 million objects. 3 million is sort of split about 60-40 between archival collections and physical collections. Curators take care of physical collections, archivists take care of archival collections. Mostly we do our own things. The museum is trying to push with a new generation of curators like myself, collecting in both of those areas at once. My specialty is advertising history. The museum has one of the largest collections of advertising history in the nation. Duke is close behind us. I don't know if they would say it like that, but I do. So in many ways, when I narrow down what I will do in business history, it is advertising history. We have a lot of silences. I would say they were deliberate and willful erasures in many cases, especially around advertising history. We're very good on ethnic images. A curator that's been there about 35 years. And when you get there, you understand people actually die with their boots on. They come as interns and stay for 30 or 40 years. A woman named Faith Davis Ruffins has done an amazing project over 30 years to collect stereotypes in advertising, and really makes a great argument about how advertising, like minstrelsy and other early visual forms in the 19th century that circulated very widely, not only maintained but created stereotypes and kept them going well into the mid to late 20th century. So we have that, but there is, when I got there and was asked to curate an exhibition on business history that would have about 120 feet of advertising history in it, there is nothing in this collection on Spanish language broadcasting and advertising, on Latino-owned advertising firms. It's like, did you miss the 80s and the 90s? Like, who was collecting? So I have an initiative right now that will take about 2 years to fill those holes, to make those silences not silent. Some of my job is 50% of my time is actually spent in the field collecting. Sometimes people call me. I was recently on Code Switch talking about this collecting initiative and Latinos, and so I got a bunch of calls out of that. But sometimes I go out and find people. You own the #1 Latino independently run ad firm in the U.S., I will be knocking on your door. And so anyway, since I've gotten to the museum in September, I've spent about 2 months of that 4 months traveling around the country, meeting with people, going through their stuff, looking at what they have to donate, and trying to figure out what deserves a place in the national collections. And by that I mean, is it historically significant enough? How do I determine historical significance? Did it make an impact? What was that impact? How did it change? These firms in particular, I'm working with 15 of them that are Latino owned, really changed the face of advertising in many serious ways. And some of it just didn't make it into the scope of the museum, but people in the industry really talk about it. So I'm a historian. Mostly I work on the 19th century in my other life, early 20th century. And now I'm working with live people. And I'm the person who says, yeah, that this thing, I'm going to take it to the Smithsonian. It's going to be there for 150, 200 years. And other people are going to use it. I will probably not write about this collecting, although that is the second part of my job, is to research and write books, and occasionally do exhibits. But I probably will not write this. So I'm collecting for those of you out there that might want to use these sources. Either borrow them from us for exhibitions, use them for your own research. So I have multiple audiences in mind. And I was here in New York for 2 days prior to this conference, and actually this was a nice synergy because I got to come here and spend some time collecting from 4 different donors in the city. And one of them was a woman, Hilda Muros, who lives up on 57th and 10th Street in a building for artists and aging actors and actresses. And she was really a star of Spanish language broadcasting. I recently got a small grant from Telemundo to collect their history because it doesn't exist anywhere. And I've been working on that. So anyway, she was a woman who started her career. She's Puerto Rican born. She moved to New York. She went to Mexico to learn Spanish, which was interesting, improve her Spanish. And then sort of had this transnational career where she started off in telenovelas and wearing really skimpy costumes as a bit actress in all sorts of things. And she has all these costumes. So her apartment, this is where a slide would be helpful, and I have a slide, but so we walk into her apartment, and she's incredibly warm and wonderful person, and gives me a big kiss and offers me pie, which is sort of a perk of the job. And she says, you know, I'm so glad you're here. Like, I just, you know, I wondered if my career mattered. And now I'm going to be in the Smithsonian. And she's like in tears. She sent me a note last night that said that my thank you note to her made her cry. There was a lot of crying in this trip. But her son had shipped her boxes and boxes of things that she had in storage in Miami. And so it was our project to cut open the boxes, take things out, put them all over her living room, see what she had. I will probably visit her 4 or 5 times to do oral histories with her as I learn more about her life so that I'm documenting the collection in that way. But she had all these costumes. So by the end, she's in her 70s. She's very straightforward, so she won't mind me saying this. So she's in her 70s, late 70s, and she wore these costumes in her. She's left home at 15 to be a movie star in Mexico. It's really a great story. And if you look at these costumes, which by the end of the day were all over the apartment, there were like feathers and spangles and kinds of crazy stuff. And I started turning them over, and I thought, you know, this is, if you really look at these costumes and what they did to her body, her female body, and how they displayed her body, I need to take these because we need, the material culture that I collect has to be embodied. And, you know, it says something, not only literally in this case, about her body and how it was reshaped for these performances and her role in these performances, but also the transition for her career. So that was the early part of her career. And then she became a very serious, once she had some stature and she told some people off in the industry, she got her own television talk show here on Channel 41 in the late 60s and early 70s. And really interviewed, they wanted her to do fluff interviews, like entertainment interviews, and she interviewed the city council, the mayor. She talked about the Tombs, the women's prison, which she went off and did a documentary on. She interviewed Celia Cruz, but in a very serious way. And so the costumes are like this great early piece, and the later piece are her business suits and everything that she wore on the air at the end. And all of the, she's incredibly productive and is now doing a show on public access, which we'll hope to collect too from New York. So that's one small example that in a way that we're trying, and I'm trying to fill in some holes in the museum's collection. And she is my primary, not just informant and source or subject, but also represents a body of stakeholders in her community that want to see this story told. I think it's very important that it's in the National Museum. And so back to this question about who's my audience, and I'll end with that, is that it's the first group is the community of stakeholders who lived that history, right? And so I'm not doing history for them. I'm not like Jill Laporte. I'm not going out and telling them the history. I'm working with them as co-producers of history that hasn't been told, right? So I'm trying, the reason for all of the multiple visits and the oral histories is because it's not a one-off. It's a relationship. I'm building a relationship with this donor so that she trusts me. She'll say things that I think people will be interested in later, but we'll also really get at the granular detail of her life, which I tell in a different way. She doesn't use words like embodiment. But it's, if I'm going to try to be her connection to the future, right, to the 150 years out from here. I had to try to think about, what should be in that box in the Smithsonian. And then the next layer is people like you who are going to come, who've done tremendous graduate work and research and want to use the collections for a project. So it has to be deep for that reason. And then the last group, and it's a big one, are the general public. So we have 5 million visitors a year to the museum. 50% of them are under 18. About 50% have not gone to college and will not go to college. So they are really a slice, when I say general audience, it's mostly families, largely white at this point, and largely not going to college. And so we have to have things that make the past both familiar and strange to them. So this is your life, it might look like your life, that's great. But I recently did a small exhibit on the history of TV. And I was like, well, we need to talk about all those favorites, Howdy Doody, but we need to talk about the birth of Spanish language broadcasting, because it happens in the 1950s. And for many of our visitors, that's the strange past, the past that they didn't live, that they don't know, that looks slightly different from their lives, but what I want them to be empathetic to. I want them not just to read it, but to try to see what those communities experienced. So that's, before it gets cleaned up and cataloged, it's curators that go out and find the stuff.
Thank you. This was excellent to hear from all of you. And I think the common thread throughout that Kathleen just touched on is this notion of new audiences, that all of you are finding new audiences through your work with primary sources. So we've got a little bit over 10 minutes for questions, so we're going to open it up to the panel.
This question is for Ansley. By using the early alumni of Wadley High School, do you ever expand the scope of history by pointing out that the Harlem was always an African American community?
So I don't know about using the early alumni. The sources that we have access to give us a sense of the 20th century story, and that story includes, and some of those yearbooks document.
1900s.
Yes, we have a few. Some of them, the earliest that I'm in touch with right now is a 1924 yearbook, and that's a majority white, majority non-native born population of girls at that point. So part of the story that is not a focus of the classes right now, but that I think is an important scholarly contribution to this work, is naming this period of urban education in the 30s and 40s, where schools like Wadley are substantively, statistically at least, integrated places and very diverse. They don't stay that way, but they are that way for a while, and that's a part of the story I don't think we know very well.
Yeah, Mary, I had a question, 2 questions about the sources. Do the sources about slavery that you're cataloging include the Underground Railroad materials that Eric Foner identified? And among the high school kids that will be invited in, will it be limited to New York City schools, or can Long Island schools come as well?
Well, to the first question, I would say that right now the website and the sources I'm working with are technically separate from the website that has Eric Foner's Underground Railroad sources, but I do think that, at least I see this as part of a larger effort that Columbia is making to, first of all, to connect with the public about all types of sources, but particularly about sources that have to do with the history of slavery. So I definitely see that as sort of another prong of, what's going on at Columbia, and then another prong would be what I'm working with now with Ty Jones, which is the class that Eric Foner taught last year also about Columbia University and slavery, and actually the direct connections between faculty, trustees, students, etc., who were at King's College and Columbia University over the past couple centuries, and how there's some actually institutional history to be explored there, and that will also eventually result in a similar website with exhibits done by undergraduate students. And for the second question, certainly we'd love to have Long Island students come in. It's, really, I
Completely
guess,
self-serving question.
really the immediate audience that we would foresee is, schools right in the area, just because I think the connections are already there with Teachers College. And also just physically, it's easier to have students walk to campus than bus in. But of course, as the project grows, we'd love to have, any teacher who's willing to bring their
The
students.
reason I ask is there are a number of institutional connections from which non-New York City schools are banned. For example, we are not allowed to go, we cannot go to the Met during the day for programs, we cannot go to a number of those sort of things, and that's why I just want to know.
Question for Kathleen and Julia. Kathleen, I was just wondering, how do you begin to assess the monetary value of a collection like the costumes, and do you have a budget to pay for these, or just a donation based on their desire to have it? And then just quickly for Julia, do you know if that was the soldier that wrote to the other Brooklyn woman? They were both African American. Do we know that? And you used the word when you talked about analyzing the letter. You said the beat was on the page, the third page. And I'm just wondering what you mean by beat. Some kind of the what?
MEAT.
Oh, the meat. Okay,
Yes.
the meat was
Yeah.
there. Okay.
So the two questions, how do I assess the monetary value, and do we have a budget to buy things? Because of museum law, we are not allowed to appraise. So, and in fact, museum ethics guard us against taking somebody's personal collection in just to display it, and then on loan, because then that gives it value. So I'm only interested in historical value. And then we do have a budget to pay for things, but mostly what we try to do is have donors donate stuff so that we're not dealing with money. The museum recently paid a lot of money for one of Benjamin Franklin's suits because they wanted it as a treasure, national treasure. So if I ever find a national treasure, I can apply for money to pay for it that I can't raise.
There's a question over here.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
We came to a lot of dead ends on definitively identifying both Edgar Dinsmore and Carrie Drayton. And in the end, it took a little bit of an intellectual risk by believing them, but they self-identified. Actually, Edgar self-identified, and then I made some really educated guesses on whether or not a white woman would read the Anglo-African and respond to somebody and write to somebody and analyze the nature of the neighborhood of where she lived on Carroll Street. But I was actually not able to find a record in his regiment for Edgar Dinsmore, and the regiment he identified himself in, and I wasn't able to find any census material on either of them. So I took them at their word, and there was a risk in that, but it was worth it to be able to feature.
I know I did see one over here. And then we'll come back up.
Thank you. This question is addressed to Kathleen. Maybe I probably missed one point. You were focusing on Latina media personality, and I'm wondering. You said something about, if I understood well, that she's Mexican?
She's Puerto Rican. She did not grow up speaking Spanish fluently in Puerto Rico, so she goes to Mexico to learn Spanish. She comes here, goes on SIN, which is the Spanish International Network, the predecessor to Telemundo and Univision, and they think she's Mexican because she speaks with a Mexican accent, and so they tell her she can't connect to the Puerto Rican community here. It's very interesting. So I don't know if but she's Puerto Rican.
But ultimately, it's also a broader issue, which is, I just coined the term, the Ted Cruz issue, how Latinos can be bundle in the same category, which also takes into the Trumpo issue, you know what I'm talking about? Enemies of the chapels, Mr. President Trump. So how can you bundle the people with such a diverse both ethnic? I'm sure many Argentinians will be aghast at not being classified as whites. I mean.
Oh, well, I would, so it's an interesting issue for us in the Latino Studies Center. We don't do Latin America, we just do US-based Latinos, and because she spent most of her career, she's born in Puerto Rico and spends her career mostly in the US, I'm looking at this as a transnational career, so that her personality, her character really develops by crossing those boundaries. But with the ad agencies, very careful, I mean, they're big, the Mexican-American community and the Mexican-American-owned agencies are very different from the agencies that were started by Cuban diaspora that came in the 60s. And so we tell those stories, and I collect those stories very differently. You know, I'm not lumping all of those people under the category Latino, Latinx. I know I used it here, but I tend in the work not to use those terms.
Hi, I have a question for all of you. So you all seem to come into your work, whether it's in the classroom or in an exhibit, or in the process of going out and gathering objects and personal belongings for future historical study, with a really clear set of complex and developed historical questions and themes, things that we're taught as graduate students to really think closely about when we approach our writing. But I'm wondering how you might describe your process of developing these questions and these themes through your work that you do, and whether it's different or nuanced in a way through the ways in which you do it.
I would say that working in a museum just adds to that. So I would use the same kind of questions of intellectual rigor in assessing whether and how we should do a project. And then I would have to add to it when it would go up, what gallery it would go in, whether we can build a curriculum around it, whether it's fundable. I mean, that's the number one criteria, frankly, is whether it's fundable. Then that question that I raised in my talk of how we can articulate this as being resonant to the moment in which it will go up. So I would just say it's more. It's the same but more. And that's why I'm always saying, public history is like what I learned in graduate school plus more skills. You know what I mean? Not like I'll do this after things don't work out in academia. It's like actually an entire body of skills, very practical skills, in addition to the intellectual rigor that we gain in our many years here.
It's a great question. I want to use it as an opportunity to say I needed to name the graduate student who does a lot of this work, and his name is Barry Goldenberg, and I'm very grateful for him. So I think that I really enjoyed trying to work more collaboratively, and I'm saying trying because I didn't get trained to. And so I think in some ways the multiple tracks of this program mean that on one track, when I propose an edited volume at Columbia University Press, I'm framing the questions in ways that come very much from my own interpretation of where I am and my own thinking at that moment. But the delight of having multiple people engaged in this from a lot of different perspectives means that those questions keep on shifting. And that's a real pleasure, and I think my belief at this point, tested only by the quality of the kinds of interactions I'm seeing with students and some of the exhibits I'm putting together, is that the work will be better for it.
I would say, I guess I'm still working on this slavery exhibit, and I think I'm kind of struggling with some of the questions that you raised, but in a previous experience, I worked on digitizing primary sources for Eric Foner's MOOC, massive online course, The Civil War Reconstruction. And one thing that I think has helped me from that experience is seeing how common to that experience and this current experience that people tend to run up against these big ideas about the Civil War, about slavery, and sometimes, as Jill Laporte was saying, like there are no women there, like that a kindergartner said that there are no women in the 18th century, which seems ridiculous from a historian's point of view, but just remembering that sometimes, you know, you do have to kind of step back and not assume that the audience has, you know, engaged with questions of gender or labor or capitalism, and kind of remember that they, you know, they're coming to this with a type of knowledge that you don't know what type of knowledge it is, and remembering that you do have to provide kind of the base level of information, but not letting that discourage you from getting at the deeper issues. And that's why I really like working closely with primary source documents, because one thing we did for the Civil War class that was great is we had a document, I think it was actually a bill of sale for a slave, and we had sort of like 3 or 4 historians give their take on this document to show how a very basic document that has, you know, just very simple information can be looked at from a lot of different points of view. So I think working with primary sources is a great way to encourage members of the public to, you know, to challenge them to think about a document in new ways, to really take apart the seemingly simple information that one source provides you with.
Agree with all of that. I would say that one thing that most or a lot of graduate programs don't teach is material culture, and so the primaries, we all learn how to read documents, set documents against each other, read against the intention of the author. That I think Julia brought up a good point. It's like, where does a document become an object, and how do objects have social lives, and how do they articulate or gesture to lived experience that may not be in the written record. So when I taught material culture classes, I always asked the folks in the class, like, what can you learn from this object that you can't learn from the written documentation? And I think that's a skill that you gain by looking at lots and lots of objects.
We're out of time, so it was joining me now.